more, perhaps. In the studio, Geddy Lee, the singer with Rush. Geddy, this is not the Rush we've known and loved over the years. Maybe a little 2112 influence here.
Mm-hmm. Definitely sort of a progression from where we left off with 2112.
It's a softer album overall than we've encountered before.
A lot more texture happening. We got into a lot of new toys on this album, things that we've been using on stage. The basic goal of this album was to continue from where we left off, but bring in more things to listen to, different sounds, interesting sounds.
Right. In the process, do you not feel you're putting yourself in a strange position? Maybe this is premature to ask this early in the program, but again, having listened to it a couple of times, I realize it's not a prototype Rush album that the fans, for example, at the CNE would immediately latch on to.
Well, I think, every album we've done has been somewhat different from the one in the past. I think our fans have come to know us as a band that is not happy with staying in the same place for very long.
Right.
We have to grow. That's a necessary part of our education. And I don't think that any Rush fan would be against our growth, because that's the reason they've invested their time and effort into our music.
One of the major compositions on A Farewell to Kings is a track called Xanadu we're about to hear. Is there a story behind that? Is it taken from legend?
It's sort of taken partly from a poem, partly from a film called Citizen Kane.
Ah.
That Xanadu is the home of Mr. Kane. And a lot of sort of atmospherics around this tale. Basically, the concentration was on music, though. Lyrics did come secondary.
And the album is called A Farewell to Kings. Geddy Lee, you're finally stretching your voice here. It's taken you a little while, almost, a little longer than a side to get to the point where you're reaching a little.
Mm-hmm.
This is primarily an instrumental album, or shall we say a musical album, certainly much more musical than Rush has done before.
Yes, 2112 is a pretty word-heavy album, and it basically was a lyrical statement that the music described. With Farewell to Kings, we had a lapse of about a year and a half where we could learn our instruments better, and we learned a lot of things about music, especially the new instruments that we're playing, and they all came to sort of the surface on this album. We wanted to put the point on music because we had learned a lot about it.
Most of that year and a half was spent on the road.
Yes, a lot of road work, which was good for us. Our playing increased, our proficiency at our instruments just increased amazingly well. We got to really cook as a band, and we learned a lot about each other, a lot about music.
This album, A Farewell to Kings, was recorded in the United Kingdom. In fact, I talked to you from both the studio and the place where you mixed it.
Mm-hmm.
Rockfield Studio in Wales. Can you tell me about that place?
Okay, if you can picture sort of the Welsh countryside, it's just a farm. There's nothing around but cows and sheep, and a couple of horses. It has living accommodation, right? It's a quadrangle, actually. One side is living accommodation, the other side is a studio, and across is an echo room that we put to good use. An amazingly relaxing atmosphere to record, and one that gives you total involvement with what you're doing. It's a really creative atmosphere.
There's nothing else to do, no trouble to get into, really.
There's ping pong table, but that's about it.
Yeah. You mentioned something about the luxury of having dinner brought to you in your room at night.
Yes, we'd have one large dinner every night in the kitchen, and a couple of girls would be cooking up amazing amounts of food. It was excellent.
You guys lived well, I take it.
Yeah, we did. We got a little fat and lost it immediately.
This album, A Farewell to Kings, is a hell of a lot more complex musically than things we've seen before. What about in production? What can you tell us about the production that we might look out for on the tracks coming up?
Well, right off the bat, you can tell, such a more present sound. Number one, the vocal sound is very clear and very big. All the instruments, we finally achieved on this album a sound that we wanted. With the computer mix down at Vision, we had the opportunity to get a basic mix together, listen to it over and over and over, and pick it apart. Take the drum sound and get precisely the drum sound we were after. Same with the bass, vocals, guitars, everything. So right away you notice the separation. You can hear each instrument in the track. No matter when we're cooking and when we're steaming and when we're hot and heavy, you can still hear every instrument very clearly. I think that's a big plus for this album.
That's something that a lot of so-called heavy metal bands cannot get into or don't get into.
It's very hard because when you're working with distortion, which is what heavy metal is to a certain degree,
Right.
there's a lot of conflicting frequencies in bass and bass drum and the guitars. And the mid-ranges always get kind of muddy, but without getting too technical, we achieved a really open sound on this album, which gave us a lot of freedom.
I take it that over the course of making this, and perhaps in the year and a half leading up to that, you've learned a whole lot about your own ears.
Oh, yeah. It was a great education, amazing education. Just so much concentrated involvement. I mean, gig after gig after gig of working and trying to hone down your sound into one that is just what you want. Going to England and working in different studios, which is an education in itself.
Yeah.
Working with other engineers that had a lot to teach us. It was really an experience.
Terry Brown co-produced this with the group.
Yes.
Terry Brown from Toronto has done your other albums.
Mm-hmm.
And Terry must have come back with a head full of new things, too.
Oh, yeah.
Is he planning on spending a whole lot of money at Toronto Sound to get his
Yes,
place?
I think so. He's definitely getting a computer.
Oh,
Definitely.
yeah?
Oh, he fell in love with it. We all did.
There's one in town already, I think. Thunder has one.
Yeah, I think so.
I don't know who else.
I think it's-
Cinderella Man and Madrigal. What can you tell us about that before we hear them?
Well, both are short tunes. Cinderella Man is a simple tune story. We used a lot of dynamics up and down, acoustics against heavy guitars. And one section in it, which is very atypical for Rush, the funky Rush sound in the lead passage, which is something we've never ever done before, but it was a lot of fun to do. We learned a lot about it. An exercise in dynamics and time changes. And Madrigal, on the other hand, is a very short, simple love ballad. It's not very long, but we felt it was a very short statement to make, and we just come in and come out with it.
Is this a concept album overall?
Not really, but there is sort of an element that runs through most of the tunes. Farewell to Kings is a pretty heavy statement right off the bat. And in each tune we deal with that same statement in different ways, but it's not a 2112, it's not one major statement that we're coming out and crashing on the head with. It's a subtle statement. Each tune deals with it differently, very differently.
Where were these tunes inspired? Did they come out of your travels? Did they come out of Europe? Did you write them here in Toronto?
Some were written on the road. A lot was written in England. Some were written in the studio. Inspired by many different things. Cinderella Man inspired me lyrically from a movie that I saw called Mr. Deeds Goes to Town with Gary Cooper. A great film. I loved what the film had to say and would love to try to put it to music. It was sort of an experiment, I guess. And it turned out very nicely. Farewell to Kings was very English influenced. The whole beginning passage to that, which is sort of a medieval thing, we recorded that outside in the courtyard. We have the Welsh birds singing in the background. And that was written on the tour there. And there's obvious English influence there. A lot of the other tunes are just influences of us playing, basically through sound checks, writing. We write whenever we can and wherever we can. Some of it was written at home in Toronto. What we do basically is it's like a puzzle. We get ideas, general ideas, and try to fit pieces to them and fit them all together. When we get into the studio, we put the puzzle together, see if it works, listen to it, and tear it apart, and in a lot of cases rewrite. We had a couple of brainstorming days where we just sat around and did nothing in Rockfield but rewrite. That's basically how we went about it.
It's a pretty expensive way to use studio time, isn't it?
It is, but we're a band that's always on the road, and we're also a band that works well under pressure, and we're also a band that's lazy. And we like to work in the studio. It's a very creative atmosphere for us because it's so concentrated.
Let's get to some more of it here. Cinderella Man and new Rush album, Farewell to Kings. Geddy Lee with us in the studio. Geddy, an album with lots of dynamics and not really that much singing, an album that comes out of a whole lot of things in your life, I guess, and a very dramatic album, full of dramatics.
Yeah, I guess it just happens with age. You get a little more serious about what you're doing. I don't know.
Did Rush ever conceive in the early days coming up with an album this cerebral?
That was our goal, certainly. I mean,
Yeah?
our goals have always been to sort of bridge the cerebral with the physical.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we've always tried to do. And the first time I think we successfully achieved that was with 2112. We've got a lot of energy, and we like to have fun with what we're doing. That's why we work with hard rock. But at the same time, we like to say something. We like to do something that keeps us interesting.
Right.
The worst thing that could possibly happen to us would be for us to get bored with what we're doing.
Yeah, I would imagine, especially in a high-energy concert situation. I presume your concerts, and you're coming up at the CNE very soon, I presume they're still going to be high-energy, kind of exciting
definitely.
kind of thing.
You'll hear the same things that we're doing on this album, but the live treatment will give them a little more of an edge, obviously.
Do you have to expand your equipment?
Oh, we have immensely. We've got stacks of toys to play with.
Yeah.
Neil has a whole range of tuned percussion that he's using now, just tubular bells and millions of things. As he puts it, anything he can hit that makes a sound he uses.
Mm-hmm.
Alex is using double necks and bass pedals, and I'm using bass pedals, double necks, and mini moog, and we're bringing acoustics into the show this time for the very first time. And it's been quite different for us.
Is your ambition, when you're making albums, is your ambition to do you have it all preconceived in your mind? Is it, I mean, except for the things we've talked about, the changes you make in the studio, but can you actually go in with an album concept like this and even put it in the same order when it comes out? Is it even in the same order?
No, this album was an album that was done, each song was treated as an individual song. At the end, we sort of juggled them together to see what was the best flow. Whereas 2112, the order was natural. It had to be in that order. The approach to this album is very different, but on each song, I think we each had a picture in our minds of how it should sound. And it's always been like that with us, and we go in the studio and we try to achieve that sound. And this is the first time we've actually accomplished that feat, I guess.
Did you use any other musicians on the project?
No, we used all ourselves.
Just the three of you?
Tried some different things and tried to expand our horizons of music, I guess, what we could play, and it worked out.
You mentioned you wrote these as songs, individual songs, and then juggled them together later.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't feel like that. It feels like a side-at-a-time kind of album, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Some albums you pick out cuts and play one or two and then put it away, but other albums you put on and play whole sides. This is that kind of album, a whole side album.
Yeah.
That must have taken some doing to get it to feel like that.
Well, we just lucked out, I guess, as far as the order.
I don't think there was much lucking out going into any of this. It all sounds very, very well put together and very well planned.
Well, we worked very hard on it, and this is the first time we actually had an opportunity to do pre-production tapes as well on some of the tunes. Plus, Xanadu.
What does that mean?
Okay, when we were back in Toronto, when we have a few days off before we went to England, we'd go in the studio and we'd put Xanadu down, just live off the floor. Try to get some idea of what the arrangement should be like.
Yeah.
Xanadu is a good example because that was one tune we've been playing for 2 months on the road before we recorded it. And it's the first time we had an opportunity to do that in many years because of our touring schedule being what it is.
Right.
And we got it broken in on stage, and it felt right. And finally, when we got to Britain and did it on the British tour, it was getting remarkably amazing response, and even our hardcore fans were coming up thinking it was some of the best things we've done. So we had a lot of confidence, and we felt very up when we went to the studio to do it.
The English press picked up on it. All of a sudden,
Yeah.
Rush is a star, and hardly anybody had heard of you before.
It's true. A lot of our fans were even surprised. They thought they were the only people in the world that knew us, but they all came together on the dates.
The closing track on the album is Cygnus X-1.
Yeah.
Significance in that?
Okay, that is, I guess, the hardest sounding tune on the album, yeah. The hottest tune on the album. It's a pretty complex piece.
With the sound effects and things at the end.
It's actually part one of a tale that is going to get pretty involved and is going to continue on the next album. It's a song basically about a black hole, Cygnus X-1. It's all science fact with a lot of science fiction added, but all the details as far as where the star is, where the black hole is, the constellations, how to get there, that's all taken right from research.
We've got a road map here in front of us.
Yeah, Cygnus is a black hole that exists in the constellation of Cygnus. It's X-1. It emits an X-ray. That's how people found it. And we took this concept of a black hole that was very fascinating and tried to build a sort of a fairy tale around it.
It's amazing how you rock stars reach into space even to find your subject matter.
Well, space is such an ideal medium to work with because its boundaries are limitless.
Yeah, and time as well for that.
Yeah, I mean, as long as you've done it right, then it can be believable because anything can happen.
Cygnus X-1 from the new Rush album, A Farewell to Kings. And the album includes the tracks of Farewell to Kings, Xanadu, Closer to the Heart, Cinderella Man, Madrigal, and Cygnus X-1. A fine effort, Geddy Lee. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
From this fan, at least.
All right.
And I'm sure this will, after all your ambition is to sell records and eat, I'm sure this will meet with acceptance, not only amongst hardcore Rush fans for years, but also from new people who haven't been familiar with the band before.
Oh, I hope so, yeah.
That was part of the ambition?
Well, our ambitions are simply to make music the best we can. Financially and otherwise is always secondary. It's always sort of the effect, but the cause is definitely music.
Yeah. It's an artistic mentality we have to come to terms with here, not a money-making mentality necessarily.
Definitely.
But it still costs a lot of money to keep a band like Rush on the road, or even on holidays, I would think.
Oh, yes, it certainly does. We've got a big payroll.
Yeah. How many people work for Rush?
Well, on this upcoming tour, there's going to be 19 people in the entourage. That's including us.
19.
Big trucks and big buses.
Well, pretty soon you'll be rivaling Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and I hope you have more success in keeping the whole show on the road than they do.
Really?
Geddy, a fine album.
Thank you very
If you
much.
would pass congratulations on to Alex and Neil.
I will do so.
A Farewell to Kings from Rush, a quiet opening, lots of dynamics, a lot more melodic, and certainly more instrumental than we've heard before, and as Geddy pointed out, textured. A lot of textures here happening. An album that'll be in the stores in probably a week and a bit, and we'll be playing it on the radio station fairly regularly. Geddy, thanks again for having us do your world premiere. Really appreciate it.
A pleasure. Toronto is hometown.
Yeah. Geddy Lee from Rush. I'm Larry Wilson. Good night from Night at 11 on Chum FM.